Thousands of families across the U.S. have lost loved ones to the nation's rampant opioid crisis. In 2014 alone, more than 47,000 people died from drug overdoses, more than any single previous year in American history.
Just this week, a Vermont woman's heartfelt obituary for her late sister has gone viral and is shining a light on the nationwide epidemic. Darren Perrin from our Vermont affiliate WCAX-TV has more.
She could and would talk to anyone, and when you were in her company, you wanted to stay.
Kate O'Neill loves to tell stories about Maddie.
She really wanted to be an actress and a Broadway musical star.
Her little sister with a big heart and bigger voice.
And Bobby sang the music of my soul, yeah.
But she never imagined.
She befriended and delighted cops, social workers, public defenders, and doctors.
She'd be writing Maddie's life story in an obituary.
She was adored as a daughter, sister, niece. She was this bright, beautiful woman, and this disease brought her to such darkness.
At 30, Maddie died from opiate addiction after wrestling with the disease for more than a decade. She tried OxyContin at a high school party at 16.
She took it, not understanding what would happen next.
She was hooked. By 18, she was shooting heroin.
She tried to stop so many times. We've lost count of the number of times she reached out for help.
But middle sister Maura O'Neill says Maddie never got what she needed. Numerous stints in rehab, dozens of relapses, and the young woman, described as smart, energetic, caring, and so funny, couldn't fight it anymore. She leaves behind the love of her life, her little boy, Aiden.
She loved him so, so much, and it breaks my heart that he's not going to know her.
Addiction was a big part of Maddie's life, so Kate wrote about it in her obituary.
It is not a choice or a weakness, and chances are very good that someone you know is struggling with it.
The family posted the obit on social media, really just to let people know the details about the memorial. But the honest and heartbreaking look at the disease resonated with people and went viral. It's been shared tens of thousands of times. Even the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, tweeted about it. Rest in peace, Maddie.
She did not want to die, and so she was very frightened of it, and I think the fact that her death is having this kind of meaning would just mean so much to her.
Well, Darren Perrin reporting there for us. So as the U.S. continues to grapple with this opioid problem, a recent feature published in the New York Times Magazine goes inside Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood. It's an area that's become synonymous with drug use. It's even earned the nickname the Walmart of Heroin. Jennifer Percy is a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine and the author of that story, and joins me now from Brooklyn, New York. Jennifer, thanks for joining me. I live in Philadelphia, and I'm familiar with the Kensington neighborhood, but you know, the way you described it was even shocking to me. And I think it's because, like many Philadelphians, you don't go there. You may sort of go to the edges where there's a lot of gentrification and the hot new restaurant is there, but if you have to pass by Kensington, you go as quickly as you can. Can you describe to people or explain why that area is called the Walmart of Heroin?
So this is the largest outdoor drug market on the East Coast, and it's all sort of concentrated in one area in Kensington, along Kensington Avenue, and conveniently along the train stops. And basically, it's an area that was hit very hard by deindustrialization in the 1950s and has suffered since. There's people on every street corner selling drugs, people using out in the open. So basically everything you'd normally see underground or behind closed doors is just out on the streets there in a very small area. But the amount of suffering in that area is just immense.
Yeah, and Jennifer, your article really moved me, and I got to admit, I followed your work for a long time, and I started to read it, and I thought to myself, well, this is just another one of those stories about people who are addicted. And as I kept sort of going through your piece, there was a moment towards the end, frankly, when that one character, Country, turned away from you and he started to cry. And that's when I started to lose it a little bit, because it just seemed as if for so many of these people who are addicted, who suffer with this addiction, that they feel as if there's no hope. And what's fascinating, as you point out, Anne-Marie, this neighborhood wasn't always like this. It went from being sort of a blue-collar factory neighborhood to this haven for drug use. And there are still some people there who are affected by what's happening there, who don't have people in their family who are addicted.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge population of residents there that moved to the area because housing was cheap and maybe they had families there. Housing, you know, you can buy a house there for $10,000. So, and these people, you know, their children walk by the encampments every day to go to school or have to watch out for needles on the streets. So it's an incredibly volatile area and very tense now that a lot of the encampments and drug activity has been moved out of a railroad encampment and onto the streets.
The area, at least for the time that I've been living in Philadelphia, has always been sort of not the best area, as they might say. You know, some prostitution in the area. But what you describe are not just Philadelphians, people who grew up in Philadelphia gravitating towards that area. You describe addicts from across the country hearing about this place and coming to Kensington. And, you know, they're homeless addicts now, but they didn't always start that way. And it's quite a range of people you sort of profile. Can you talk to me a little bit about who these people are and how they wound up in Kensington?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting phenomenon because it's a historically very poor minority neighborhood. And now there's a huge population of wealthier white people moving into the area from the suburbs that are stuck there on the street, homeless, using heroin, and can't get out. They're stuck there. They're so addicted that they can't even leave this 1 mile radius, really. And a lot of the stories I heard were people that had gotten addicted to opioid painkillers after a surgery, or, you know, just trying it on with a friend at a house and went down first to buy drugs and then ended up using in Kensington as well, and just never left. So there were parents walking around looking for their children and holding up photographs, trying to find loved ones. Most of the people were not from there, although some people that grew up in the neighborhood certainly were exposed to drugs early on and also ended up on the streets. So it was a really diverse mix. I even met one person with a trust fund. I mean, some of these people are not people you would expect to be on the streets, but have been their lives have been totally ruined by opioid addiction.
You know, Philadelphia Mayor, as you know, Jim Kenney took office in 2016, and he's been pretty aggressive trying to address the city's opioid crisis. The one thing, though, that I'm still not clear about is, you know, I grew up here in New York City during the 70s and 80s, during the height of the cocaine and ultimately the crack epidemic. What is different about what New York City, what Harlem, what Brooklyn, and some other neighborhoods here in the tri-state area experience versus what we're seeing now with this opioid addiction? Because it does seem like with the mayor trying to battle it, that is different than what it was back then. But other than that, I'm trying to understand the differences and maybe the similarities.
Well, I think the biggest difference between the crack epidemic of the 80s and the current opioid epidemic has to do with race and also semantics and how we're talking about the problem and how we're approaching the problem. This is a big topic of discussion among community residents in Kensington, that basically the city abandoned them during the 80s, during the crack epidemic, and now suddenly they're paying attention to them. And why, for example, would they now have to suffer as minority Hispanic residents already trying to make their way through a difficult life in the neighborhood? Why would they have to suffer through, you know, for example, a safe injection site in their neighborhood? So that was a very, very hot topic. Often people were comparing this situation, or at least the approach to solving the situation, in contrast to the 80s.
Yeah, what she brings up is something that had been sort of floated, and it was very heated conversation about whether or not they should just put safe injection sites in Kensington. Because
Duncan did a story on
right,
that.
because the addicts are there, they're having a very difficult time moving them out. So why not make them safer? But I think you're right. You know, the conversation changed from sort of lock them up, and you outline in your article that you know, the criminal justice system in Philadelphia is sort of the biggest drug treatment center that is in Philadelphia. From lock them up to treat them and their victims, right? And you're right. What changed over the decades?
It's Jennifer, I sort of, having read some of the research and other reporting, thought that was the case, but I wanted to hear from you, somebody who's, you know, deeply covering this and even embedded with some of these individuals, that there is a racial component to that. And I know some people don't want to hear that. Back in the 80s, when people were smoking crack here on the streets in Morningside Park, they were mostly African American, and now it feels like with this opioid crisis, it's hitting white America, and that is what seems to be galvanizing, you know, any people from the President of the United States down to you know, local county supervisors.
Yeah, and it used to be called, you know, the war on drugs was the term, and now the opioid epidemic, which is a softer term and focused more on harm reduction rather than arresting people.
Such great reporting. You know, Jennifer, we should see more reporting like this because it's such an important issue and an important topic. Thank you so much for shedding some light on it for us, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.